Hey there, Ddraig here, and I'm back in Kislev with a new version of Decomposed, Crisord and Dindi, Kislev Reborn. Now people who've been watching my videos for a while may remember seeing another video on Kislev, which was the expanded roster which was done by Decomposed and Crisord. People who keep an eye on the Decomposed mods know that he wanted to redo the mod, so here it is. In this video, as always, I break down the unit roster. Now originally I was just going to add the new units, but after looking over the mod I decided to redo the roster from scratch. So let's go to the icy north, keeping a watchful eye on the horizon for chaos, and check out what the team have come up with. First up are the legendary hordes, and our first choice is Boris, a revered leader who made it his goal to take back Kislev lands from the numerous creatures which have come into this region, bring order and reviving the cult of Originz. He was so determined to bring back all the lands that Kislev had lost to the goblins, beastmen and trolls, that he nearly bankrupted the entire state, hiring mercenaries to help train and also rebuilding the infrastructure. So Boris himself is a strong combatant with a good high melee attack and a solid in defence with a decent charge to boot, having a silver shield to add to his armour. While he's a decent combatant, he's not a duelist. In 1v1 fights with 140 AP, can deal it out a bit, but not as well as some of the legendary hordes. When it comes to items, he can use a shard braid, boosting attack strength, and adding more melee attack, and also bringing a magical attack, which includes slowing down the enemy with frostbite. Also some armour boosted defence, and a very high ward save of 15% to boot as well, making him very tough on that front. He also has a standard buffs, hold the line and stand the ground. If you want to add more damage to him, you can mount him on a bear which he rescued called Ursus, boosting armour, speed and damage, giving him a huge charge. 200 AP with a bonus charge of 35, really giving him a lot of punch, especially when riding ahead of the cavalry. Now on to Boris's daughter, Tzarina Katarin, the current leader of Kislev after her father's death. A powerful ice witch, taking the power from out of the land. Considered to be one of the most powerful ice witches to ever lived. So Katarin's stats are also nothing special, being a wizard, but she has got a reasonable defence and a frostbite, reducing speed of anyone she hits. Like all wizards though, keeping her away from harm's way is the key. Before we got onto the magic, she can be mounted on horses or this magical sway, giving her so much needed armour and speed as well. Of course, that large mass always helps. A very handy mount to protect her, and if she gets in trouble she can always charge through anybody attacking her. Onto her abilities now, and first up is Chewing Aura, slowing the enemy down all around her, making it much easier for Katarin to escape. Also, beloved of Kislev, the Tzarina is adored by her people and would do anything for her, so she boosts leadership and makes them immune to psychology as well. Something you can take advantage on a sway. Lastly, we have Gift of the Winter. Whenever she casts, everyone has a large physical resistance applied to them and a frostbite to the enemy. Means casting cheap spells can give these benefits easily, as they're very powerful. Especially if they're just about to charge any of your ranks. Onto the ice magic now, and completely different spells for this year, created by of course the modding team. First up is Glacial Barrier, adding physical resistance and hiding allies, with a huge range, and it can also target the ground as well, bringing sneaky flank attacks possible. Also adding that missile resistance if they are close to the enemy, so they won't suffer so much damage when the enemy realises what has happened. Shield of Cold is a unit buff adding some high melee attack and damage resistance. A great buff for tipping the balance in your favour on a weak unit, or using it on a hard hitting unit to really ensure their hit. Midwinter Kiss, that is a debuff, this time dropping melee defence and speed significantly. Again able to hit the ground in a good large area. Great for making sure that cavalry do not retreat after coming out of your ranks. Then you can push in some other troops to close the net, especially as they are also weakened in defence. Wind of Ice is your classic breath spell, and as all of them do some damage but not a huge amount, but it's a cheap way to proc your Gift of Winter. Onto the proper damage spells now, Shard Storm is a classic bombardment spell in an area and lasts a decent amount of time. Or Ice Storm, a long lasting vortex ability which is very expensive but can also deal significant damage to your foes. Lastly, 2 items. First up, the Crystal Cloak, making her very tough in combat, with that huge 44% resistance to damage, and some extra defense. While she won't kill anyone, she'll be a lot harder to take down. Also, if you wanted to kill stuff, make sure she's wielding a Fear Frost weapon, as the ability re-increases her damage. Personally, she's much too powerful to be used in combat, but it does give her the option, and on its way this can cause a surprising amount of damage. Onto your more standard heroes now. First off is the Ungol Ottoman. Pretty much your standard cheap general and a weaker version of Boris, which we went over before. Can be mounted on a warhorse, but it acts AP damage at 130. Tough, but nothing special. A cheap way to lead your army. Onto a slightly better combat yard now, with yet more defense and armour. Thus giving you a slightly tougher yard and also added a bit more melee punch. If you got the spare cash, worth the investment. There's not much to say about both of these yards, as they're pretty much the standard type of this generic yard. They both provide buffs of hold the line and stand your ground. Onto the heroes now, and first up is this dirt cheap one, that's only 466, and that's with Full Seeker and Death Blow. So he's well worth the investment. He's a duelist with a decent armour, okay defence and attack, with 255 AP, which is pretty high, and an anti-infantry bonus of 15. Meaning against a lot of similar foot yards, he can actually do a lot of damage. And pretty much a good match for most generic yards. And I would say pretty much a bargain at that cost. He can also be mounted on a warhorse, adding more charge damage. Next we have the Boyar, similar to the last hero, as he's very good damage, but not as specialised in 1v1 duties. A bit more armour, and still have decent stats and that high 260 AP damage, means he can definitely bring some good damage. But he also has more army buffs, with Hold the Line. I tend to go for the more cheaper Droisky for good sniping yard skills. But this Boyar does have a decent role in play in the army, and he can also be mounted on a warhorse or a barbed warhorse. The last of the melee heroes is the Priest of Ursun. More of a buffing hero, as you can see. The combat stats are yakking behind both of the previous 2 heroes, and with only 120 AP, damage means he won't be much use on the front. However, he has 2 prayers. First, Growling Fury, adding a decent AP damage buff and a charge. As this priest can be mounted on a bear, you can let him either charge and boost a couple of units of cav to really bring some damage, as the Kislev charge is pretty powerful and we'll be coming to them later. Also Prayer of Ursun, buffing combat stats nicely and making them unbreakable for 25 seconds. Great way to support any front line, or again adding some more combat boosts on the cavalry charge. A great hero and my personal favourite of the 3. As always, these abilities add more utility to the hero, and of course you can go in riding a bear, so bonus points there. Onto the caster heroes now, and we have 2 options. Here is the Hag Witch, with her own particular set of spells. As you can see, I don't really need to tell you about the combat prowess of this character, because the spells are where it's at, so let's go straight into that option. First up is the casting ability, Unnatural Presence. A truly powerful ability in its own right, as dropping these stats for 30 seconds is pretty crazy. When you have a constant string of spells every 30 seconds provides a huge benefit for your army. Her spells, Hag's Blessing is the first one, and is your standard buff, but it's a hell of a start with a melee defense and damage resistance for 40 seconds. It's only 6 cost, gives a unit a decent toughness buff, and notice that range at 400 meters. While it is only 1 unit, that range means that Hag can be safe behind your lines at some same magical cost, adding a more melee attack and damage again, with that crazy 400 meter range. It speaks for itself as a great way to buff any unit. I do like to use on cavalry, which is commonly away from your main army, and usually out of range of your spells. Also adds some reload speed as well, handy because Kislev has some excellent range cavalry. Because of the open hands of Kislev, you can always boost up the speed as well, to quickly close that distance on the battlefield. A debuff on the enemy now, and a potent one, dropping speed and armour with great synergy. When used against enemy cavalry on the charge, reducing the impacts on your units, especially because it's a ground spell and can be placed right in front of a unit, and if timed right, can reduce the impact. Also drops the enemy defences as well, so you can come around for a counter charge. Curse Pledge freezes the enemy in one place against the ground, allowing you to open up with your missiles. And then when they do get unfrozen, the combat stats are weakened, allowing you your next wave to hit them extra hard. Lastly, Curse of Misfortune focuses more on ranged units you're facing, while Nyoke, to get close enough to use on Etsuri against the enemy's missiles units, provides a great way to stop the enemy doing damage to you, as they last for 30 seconds. And then when they have to get close to you to actually apply their own damage. A great magical hero, and has lots of utility on the battlefield. But we're not done yet, let's move on to the next hero. The Ice Witch is the other magical choice, and like the Tzarina, has some significant magical damage on the battlefield, with a powerful use of spells, which are different to Katarin. Again, the combat stats are weak, but she can be mounted on horses, or even an Ice Pegasus, as you can see here, adding a lot of speed, but not exactly increasing combat stats. So that covered, let's jump into the spell list. First up is the casting ability, dropping magical resistance, handy to pretty much negate any resistance the enemy has, such as the dwarfs. First spell is Storm Strike, a breath attack which costs more than the usual type, and it's pretty damaging, especially to chaff units. Next we have Chill Blast, a wind attack this time, with more AP damage and is slightly cheaper. As with all wind spells, timing is all. Ice Shards next, a powerful magical missile spell with a large explosion at the end. Has a good range as well, so make sure you can cast them as they come in. Biting Wind is a good vortex spell, and any random moving spell means keeping it away from your own true units. Also, if this spell actually freezes your enemy, it means that it can take the full hit, and it's a particularly nasty spell. You may be seeing a pattern by now because all the ice spells are damaging, which makes them even more fun to use against the armies you're facing. Ice Blizzard is next, which is a direct damage spell, and can increase recharge abilities on the unit it hits. Also, you may notice that all these spells are pretty expensive to cast, so take that into account, as running 2 casters in armies is difficult at the best of times, and with this yaw it really drains your mana quite easily. Lastly is Hailstorm, a bombardment spell, causes huge damage on occasion, and again has this huge range to cast for 300 meters, making it very handy for helping a fight out when your melee units or missiles are not close enough. So we're on to the core units of Kislev now, and of course the infantry are up first, starting with the Godspell Warriors at 325 points. As always, all the stats you will see are on ultra settings for model counts. So this is a cheap defensive unit. They're okay and provide a solid wall of spears against the opposition. Defense is nothing spectacular but sound, and will keep the chaff at bay. Of course the damage and their pitiful melee attack is not great, but there's some good buffer magic as you've seen, so remember that as we go for this list. Damage is low at only 6 AP damage, but at least has that 15 anti-Yarge bonus, so they can be pretty effective against Yarge units. While we're on the warriors, and before we move on to talk about the rest of the roster, there's a global Kislev buff, Kin of the Bear God. The Kislev faction are a hardy bunch, and being brought up on the edge of the Chaos Wastes, and of course Norska being next door as well, means they have seen some horrible things in their time. So rather leadership looks low on the card, all Kislev units have this buff, boosting the leadership by mighty 20, making them pretty sturdy in the front line, and they don't break as easy as some of other Empire factions. Next at 400 points, we've got some more standard infantry, which provides a bit more punch. These hardy lads, who clearly do not suffer from frostbite easily, are decent chaff killers, and can easily put some damage against infantry, that's 7 AP and a bonus to infantry of 4. But we do use models easily, due to no armour, so remember to mix them up with tougher units, or use them to add a bit of punch and charge them in after a battle is joined. The Corsairs are similar to the previous unit, provide some badly needed AP punch at 20, but of course use a bit of defence without no shield. Again, you can use them as the counter, more heavily armoured units this time, but keep them away from elite units, all for that nice 450 cost. Our first regiment of renown, the Stargrad Militia, at 600 points. Immune to psychology and buffed up stats all over against his standard Ungair warriors. Means they can put out some decent damage, with a bit of AP at 8. A good solid unit, but nothing spectacular. But their leadership is very high, meaning they can weather a storm as good as any unit in the front line, especially when they haven't even got an unbreakable stat. The Strazzi are a step up in defence and an anti-arch threat as well, making a really good choice for a flank or to plug in the centre. They can be used in many places in your army and do really solid work for that 700 point cost. Are pretty reasonable, and this provides double your usual spear choice. These provide 18 AP damage and some anti-arch of 16. These have to be respected by the cavalry you face, as they can hurt them when you have 120 agri Crisvites. With some better armour as well, and when you get that melee defence around the 40 mark, you're looking at a really solid unit. Back around another regiment of renown, where true keepers are some really good damage dealing infantry, with 8 AP and a decent 8 anti-arch. You can do damage to a lot of units, especially when you counter they have the frenzy ability as well. With the really high melee attack, and remember it's boosted again by frenzy, you take your enemy down before they get thwarted, which is really well because they've got low armour and very low defence. Means they can pretty much melt to anything. Never have this unit on its own, and always make sure they never take a charge for pretty much anything. Let's face it, zombies could grind their way through this unit, and you'd raise that damage punch. 750 points are not cheap, so make sure you find the right target to hit, especially because they need a lot of babysitting, and again, make sure they're never alone. The Tor Guard, another regiment of renown, this time Great Axe Infantry at 850 points with good armour and a magic attack as well. They also have AP of 26 and anti-infantry of 9, meaning this unit can actually give as good as it gets, and this is the guard ability as well, making a great choice for a bodyguard for your hero or yours. And of course, this is exactly what it is made for. Keeping a combat yard and combine this damage as well means they can tear down most heroes and even some edge of the yards. At 1000 points, the famous Kremlin Guard are guardians of the palaces of the Tsars. With good high armour, high leadership and decent stats, and a lot of damage on their axe at 28 AP. A really good damage dealing unit, and they can also survive as well. Especially if you buff this unit with magic, it can increase the kill power even more. The last and most expensive unit is another regiment of renown, the Defenders of Alexandrov are 1200 points and unbreakable, with high armour and really good defence, and their damage matches this with 23 AP and a bonus to infantry of 10, means they can really do an awesome job of killing most things. If you're going to lead the charge against Chaos Warriors and of that ilk, or even Chosen, this unit might actually be able to take some damage and actually give it back to them. Onto the range firepower, and starting with the Chekists. At only 400, this armour piercing pistol unit provides a nice bit of range firepower, be it at close range. Also, they can fire when moving, so charging them in, shooting is always a great way to start any fight. Their base combat fires are actually reasonable, as long as you come in from behind and don't expect too much from them, it can easily make up on that 400 cost. Also, they have a unit ability, giving an added bonus to leadership, not that the Kislev needs this, and some defence as well, but it also drops your own melee units melee attack, so it's a bit of a mixed bag in this case. Keep them more on the flanks and use them to help punish units, and then charge in to do some finishing work. Now we have some more Corsairs, this time armed with bows, and also provide some ranged anti-arch threat, which is always a good bonus. Much like the Huntsmen of the Empire, these come in at 550 cost, which is a bit cheaper, and they do some nice range damage as well. The melee stats are however poor, so make sure they stick to what they're good at, and especially that 8 bonus to charge on these wing shots, they're a decent choice for any back line. Back with this unit, and this time they bring some rifles. While the combat stats are low, and of course their armour is pretty low as well, they are just a cheap missile firing line, and of course they're pretty awesome as well. At 650 points, they are reasonable and only slightly more expensive than Empire handgunners by 50. Useful as you're close to chaos where they do like the armour, so these armour piercing missiles are vital. When it comes to Vanguard options, Kislev has not got that many options for infantry or even missile units. However, there's a couple of exceptions, and this is one of them. With more damage output on their ranged attacks, they can provide some sneaky attack on the flanks. But I tend to stick them in your normal ranks and use the cavalry to patrol further out, as these are expensive at 700 points, but we do provide that damage for that cost. Lastly, we have the only regiment of renown for the missile units. This unit is at 800 points, and is the only other option they do for Vanguard. As I've stated before, this is not one of the strengths of the Kislev army. There's a different story for the cavalry, which we'll come to next. They can be used on the flanks or indeed in Vanguard options, but they do need to have a lot of support. So be aware of this, and you may have to sacrifice some of your cavalry to protect them. So make sure you're committed to this Vanguard option. Onto the cavalry options now, and of course this is a good place for the Kislev army. We have a lot of good options, so let's start off with the 600 points of the Tzarina, a cheap option for some Vanguard cavalry, and the only choice for melee cavalry with Vanguard. However, the missile cavalry make up for this, and more of them in a bit. Shielded with decent armour, they're a great way to harass back lines and are quick at the 80 speed, so keep them moving and charge down some missile units, or even send them out to take out the artillery. Straight into a nice cheap regiment of renown now, the Rota of Dawn, a good hard hitting cavalry providing fire and magic attacks, which is a rare mix. With a good charge bonus and a reasonable combat stats, but nothing spectacular, and of course that high speed means they're a good choice. If you want a unit with more bite. Lacking AP at only 10, you best send this against low armoured infantry. But remember that magical attacks negate some of that armour, so they won't suffer for those low AP units as others do. They also have Blinding Radiance, a great debuff, dropping melee attack around them as you charge into the enemy. Now we get to the more iconic Kislev units, and of course the Winged Cavalry, or the Winged Lancers. Instantly recognisable, this unit has a great on charge, but suffer immediately if held in combat, so get used to rotating them out, as this is the best way to get out the potential damage they can provide. At 850 points, they are a solid choice, and have decent armour as well, and keeping that high speed, so you should always be able to keep ahead of the elite cavalry of other factions. More regiment of renown. This unit, similar to the last, but much more potent at 900 points. Better melee attack and armour sundering, but even worse in defence. However, they do keep that decent speed and that decent armour. And a really high 40 AP damage means they're a great mobile force to pick out heavy armoured threats. And that sunder puts a serious dent in their armour as well, creating a lot of damage. As you can see, the Kislev faction do like a good charge, and this 1150 units of the Griffin Legion, which possess AP of 8 and anti-charge of 8, are no exception. A huge charge bonus and a great anti-cavalry threat, but do like a bit of AP damage. However, they are still quick, armoured and shielded, so they can okay at defending themselves. Now if you think that charge was good, they also possess a constant ability, boosting it slightly more, and can also cause fear, giving it a potent mix to say the least. Another good charging unit, but slower than previous, but significantly better in combat, with decent defense, so can actually hold their own. At the Archer unit you can actually send in and not worry about it as much. They do have a good aura as well, the ability to resist damage around them. Interesting, you only have prize as long as they're above the 50% mana mark. And nothing I would particularly work around when it comes to using magic, but it's interesting, and it's still a fast unit of moving cavalry. Also the cavalry options now, and then another icon of the faction, the Sons of Orosan. Parry and Kislev. If you see an angry bear, what you need to do is of course ride it and then throw it into the battle. A hard hitting unit with some real mass behind it, and of course that charge damage with 35 AP and 20 anti-infantry means this unit eats all infantry evenly eat. And by axe numbers you can always put it against weakened ones, and they chew through them, and at least has a possibility of course the fear as well. They also have Mighty Roar, as mentioned before on Boris when he was on his bear, and a potent force at 1400 points, which means they're expensive but well worth the cost. Next onto the Missile Cavalry, and again this is where Kislev shines with some great options. First up is the Ungol Horse Archers, a really cheap but high effective mobile cav force. At only 525 points is a steal, as they provide a lot of good skirmishing options and that vanguard potential. And of course will charge in if need be, with that high speed of 95, which either means they can get into trouble or get out of trouble very quickly. If you want a bit extra damage and don't mind getting closer to the enemy, you can go with the Ungol Krog. Again with that high speed, and again of course with that your combat abilities, they can just get in, shoot and get out, and do not even get near the enemy. As if they get close, they can get caught out much easier than the previous unit. But we do provide that extra damage from in close, so just be on your toes. A bit slower unit now at 700 points, for only 75 speed, so just be aware of that. They are a bit better in combat, but I'm not sure I would take this unit over the others, as I'm not going to put them into combat at the start line anyway, so you might as well save your money and use the other choices. Then again, if you just want an improved version for another Vanguard unit, this one will do the job. Whilst all the other units had Vanguard, this unit does not, but it does have some rifles and can fire while moving, which is a very handy option for your army. At 750 points, they provide a lot of nice damage, but again, not much combat stats worth of note. This unit is more useful if you're facing high armour, as they can punch through it better than any of the other options. One or two of these in your army can definitely help soften them up. They also have that Checker's Fear, which I mentioned before, so just something to take note of when you're running other units near them. Not to be outdone, Kislev have their own wagons. Put some brave soldiers on the back of a wagon, get them pulled around, and spread their damage. Fast and can be used as a chariot, and of course it's got decent range as well. 750 points can provide a lot of useful options to break up ranks or to position behind the enemy and provide some extra damage, and at a speed of 80 still means cavalry will struggle to catch them, so as long as you keep an eye on where they are. Much like the previous unit, the war wagon just provides armour piercing shots with their rifles. Again, it can be used as a chariot, but it's not a great idea as it was before, because they're a bit slower than the previous. But it does have a ability of mobile force, locking it into place and increasing accuracy and defence. So putting this behind your lines, making sure it's well secure, then pressing this ability really increases the accuracy and can actually do some really good damage. If all else fails, and do not have anyone brave enough to ride them, you can always send in the bears to do some scary damage on their own. Much like with Sons of Orosan, they provide a lot of punch, but these are dirt cheap at 650. But we don't get the leadership or the combat stats. A useful tool to support your attacks, and can still provide fear and that Mighty Roar ability. Onto the R section now, and of course that's the artillery, with your standard light cannon of Kislev. Like a bit of range and the anti-arch ability of the Empire Great Cannons, these naturally still pack a bit of a punch and are cheaper at 700 points. As always, any cannon in your army is always handy. Onto a Regiment of Renown version of a cannon. At 900 points, so 100 more than the Empire standard Great Cannon. Adding more stats across the board, and that great magical ability means the Regiment of Renown is pretty handy to have on any army when fighting such factions as the Undead to take advantage of that magical abilities. This familiar looking cannon looks like it's been ripped straight out of the hands of the dwarves, and of course provides the same similar benefits. With a full volley cannon, each can be truly devastating on the battlefield. Put 4 of them on the battlefield together and they can really do some great damage, even especially against charging units, and can almost stop it in the tracks with a large volley, all for 1100 points, and can definitely make that value up with the units it can destroy. Last but no means least, at 1100 points, Kislev have clearly said if you're going to go big, you might as well go very big with this monster of a cannon, providing a huge speed up buff to anything it hits, and as long as you can keep it alive and away from the enemy, as it would be target number 1. Keeps infantry in the back lines to stop it being taken out early doors, and then it rain down fire from above. Thanks for watching, and congratulations again to the team behind the Kislev Reborn mod. On to my next video, which I'll probably do a quick campaign overview and show off some skill trees and the tech tree as well.